So welcome to our digital summit on fires, haze, health, applied research, collaborative design, and prototype development. This is the very first digital summit convened by the Global Landscapes Forum, the GLF. So this is the first in hopefully a long series of online digital summits, which might be webinars, online meetings, or online learning events, which we organize together with the GLF partners, either to follow up on past conferences or run up towards new conferences, or simply to elaborate on issues which are active and alive in the larger GLF community. So the purpose of these digital summits is to bring the GLF community tighter together beyond merely the physical events that we organize, one or two or three per year, but to keep that conversation going throughout the year. So this is the first digital summit as a follow-up on the Peatlands Matters event that we had in Jakarta May this year. This is an event which probably many of you attended, or either online or on site. And I know from the subscriptions that many of you said that you were interested in the issue of the peatlands. But beyond this, this webinar is also a first, as we're connecting 10 different presenters and moderators together into one webinar. May I remind you to please keep your audio and your video muted so that we don't have any background noise disturbing from the presentation. Thank you. So beyond this webinar is also a first, as we're connecting no less than 10 different presenters and moderators together into one webinar. And as such, we are definitely going to challenge the gods of information technology, the emperors of the internet, and all of Murphy's Law. So while we have prepared for this webinar for over 2 months now, we're still challenging technology. So if something would go wrong, please bear with us, and we will rectify the problem and stay online. Now, during this webinar, I will also be joined by Lindsay Grosveld, who will manage part of the slides. Lindsay is joining us from the middle of the night in Canada at the moment. Um, Lindsay has also been crucial in pulling this webinar together. My name is Peter Cazier, and I will be moderating your questions, and I also have the honor of introducing our speakers. Lindsay and I both work for the communications team in the GLF Secretariat. Another person who was crucial in putting all of this together is the endlessly tireless Richard Wacker, who works for UNICEF in Indonesia. Richard prepared most of the content, got the speakers together, whipped them up to get all of the presentations in time, and build a real interesting program for you today. But before we start, a word on the logistics of this webinar. For this webinar, we are all connected through a tool called BlueJeans. BlueJeans allows the presenters to show their video webcam, so you see at least who is talking, their audio, and we will share the slides of the different presenters controlled from over here. Now, what is crucial for us to make this webinar run well is that only the speakers unmute their audio and their video, that all other participants keep audio and video muted. Your feedback, your tips and questions should only be done via the chat box, which you should see on the top right-hand side of your screen. I think it's the second icon from the top. So please keep your audio and the video muted, including Martin, and otherwise it will suck up a lot of bandwidth from everyone. Even though, as usual, we are with a really big group. We had 5 or 110 registrations for this webinar. I would still like this session to be as interactive as possible. So I do encourage you to send remarks, suggestions, and questions already during the presentations of the different speakers using the chat box. So we will collect during the time slot where we have the presentations. We will collect all of your questions, and we will pitch them at the end of this webinar towards the presenters. If we would have some questions that were left unanswered during the webinar itself, because we're still limited to 2.5 hours, then I will collect all of those unanswered questions and pitch them to the presenters, and we'll send them over to you, the answers, the aggregated answers, during a follow-up email. Also, at the end of this webinar, we will upload the recording, and I will share with you the link to the recording as well as a link to the full presentation file. But to introduce the topic of today, I would like to have Richard run through the program. Richard manages the UNICEF Indonesia social policy portfolio on emergency response. Richard, if you could please unmute. He runs the UNICEF Indonesia social media portfolio on emergency response, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and mitigation. Richard, it's all yours to take people into the program.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're fine. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar today. As you've probably seen from the links that were shared, the focus of this webinar is on fire, haze, and health. This is the sequel, we might say, to a panel discussion that we had at the GLF Peatlands Matter conference that was held in Jakarta on May the 18th this year. In that panel discussion, UNICEF Indonesia, UN Environment, Pulse Lab Jakarta, and some other partners presented on our work on this important topic. As you're aware, the forest and land fires occur on an annual, nearing on an annual basis in Indonesia, and the air pollution from these fires affect the Southeast Asian region. You know, our story very much relates to this issue where the haze, or this sort of thick, acrid haze, will extend over periods of Sumatra, Kalimantan, and Southeast Asia for a period up to a few months. In 2015, peak exposure reached 10 times the hazardous levels. And from population census data, we are aware that over 12 million people live in these fire-prone areas, many of whom are children, which is obviously, of course, the interest that UNICEF has in this issue. Just a bit of background: the air pollution caused by slow-burning organic matter releases fine particles that can be absorbed into the bloodstream through the lungs and affecting vital organs. Research has shown that air pollution is linked with immediate and long-term health outcomes. However, the main issue that we're facing is that ethnographic research tells us that people in Indonesia do not see haze as a serious health risk. Children are disproportionately affected as their brains and vital organs are still developing. And we'll hear a little bit more about these issues with the presenters from the presentations today. Just in order of sequence, I'm just checking if that second slide is up now. So in terms of the presenters today, Heri Purnomo from C4 will present on the drivers and some of the recent measures to mitigate fires, highlighting the economic and political nature of fires. He'll be followed by Steve from the Reality Check Approach Group, or linked with Palladium Group, and he'll discuss some of the community perspectives related to fires and air pollution, and underscoring that low level of awareness that I mentioned. Then Dias will present from Pulse Lab Jakarta will reflect on the use of big data to map human behavior in relation to fires using the Haze Gazer, a real-time monitoring tool of human response. Lodi also from Pulse Lab Jakarta will introduce how ethnographic research and big data has served to inform the design of prototype solutions to address the social impacts of air pollution. Then we'll have a joint presentation from Nanis and Jean-Pierre Wack, who will share on testing results of one of these prototypes, which is the Haze Emergency Kit, which aims to address health exposure issues. The next presentation will be another duet with Lina from Ranu Wellum and Wally from Big Red Button, who will reflect on their experience in mobilizing a community response during and after the 2015 fires, their independent efforts to create a haze shelter, and their designs for a village solution, a community level solution. I'll then speak briefly regarding the link between the SDGs, fire, and haze, I'll make mention of the importance of looking at the trade-offs and impacts and in land use decision making, and also shed some light on the importance of linking air quality and health data. Then we'll proceed to the Q&A session, which will be gleaned from some of your comments in the chat box. So please do write down your questions when they come to mind, and we'll pull them together at the end. Thank you. Over to you, Peter.
Good. Thanks, Richard. As you see, we have quite a bit of a lineup of presenters. Harry, I will unmute you now because you're the next one. I'm unmuting your audio and unmuting your video. Harry, you're all set. I would like to introduce Harry Purnomo, who works, I would say, with us in C4, but we're all in the family of C4 and GLF. Harry Purnomo has a PhD in forest management and policy, and a bachelor in agriculture meteorology from the Bogor Agriculture University. He's joining us actually also from Bogor, from a C4 office in Bogor. He also has a master's in informatics from a joint program between the University of Indonesia and the University of Maryland, USA. He currently conducts research on political economy of fire, haze, governance, oil palm for sustainable landscape and timber value chains. Harry, I'm pulling up your first slide. Harry, it's all yours, and I can hear your audio and I can see your video. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Good evening, everyone who is joining this GLF Summit. I'm going to talk about landscape and fires. First, next, please. So, fires involved in the landscape transformation. In several landscape, fire is used to transform from forest, you see in the slide, from forest to agriculture, and sometimes from shrub to agriculture. And when I talk about agriculture, it means a lot of oil palm or rubber sometimes. And in 2015, there was 2.6 million hectare burned in Indonesia, and 37% of 2.6 million was peat, when the others were mineral soil. I think it's a huge disaster at that time. 24 people reported death, and 103,000 people experienced what we call a premature death. And World Bank mentioned that the economic loss for that fires 16.1 billion US dollar. And from my research also, it's not only economic loss, but some people actually obtain benefit from using fire for agriculture preparation. And we calculated, my team, based on our study in Rio, was 8 billion US dollar benefit from fire at that time. So some people actually lost due to fire, most people, the citizen at large, but some people, few people actually obtain a benefit from the use of fire in 2015. Next, please. And when we talk about fire, the question is who use fire? And based on our finding, actually is corporation, a big corporation, mid-sized investor, as well as small-scale farmers involved in these fire uses. There's three categories. First is a corporation, mid-sized investor, mid-sized company, as well as the small-scale farmers. If you look at the slide, this is about the fire density. Most fire actually happen in the wood plantation in terms of number of hotspots per million hectare. Is wood plantation areas the most dense fire, and then follow up by oil palm, both in the forest zone as well as in the non-forest zone. You know, in Indonesia, oil palm is planted legally in the non-forest area, but some planted illegally in the forest area, and then followed by community. Community also use fire, also private in the private land. Also, fire happening in the conservation area, such as national park, protection of forest, and also other protected areas. And the last one, fire happened in the logging concession, but not much. You see, almost everybody actually involved in fire disaster. Again, I mentioned big corporation, mid-sized investor, as well as small-scale farmers, and also happen in different land uses. Next, please. When we talk fire in concession, it's not easy. This is from the research from my colleague David Gavu in Rio. Even when it is fire located inside the concession, sometimes it's done by the corporation itself, and sometimes illegally done by people who illegally entered to the concession. We call it a community. But community can be not only poor farmers, but can be local elites, mid-sized investor who entered to the concession illegally. And in Indonesia was a debate who would be responsible if fire happened in the concession, whether the concession or the concession can blame someone else that they cannot control the area. From my point of view, according to the law 41/99 on forestry, as well as law 32 on environment, there is a strict liability. If fire happen in the concession must be responsible first, and then we can talk who actually the real actors. So a strict liability is that's what I believe. If the concession cannot protect the area from fire, I think it's better if the area, the concession, the corporation talk with the government to give the area back to the government. So you see from this slide, 48% of fire is based on our study in Rio, happen in the concession, for 52% happen outside concession. You know, unless some companies was in court, there are some fines and charges applied to the companies, and the government now try to push the companies to pay the fine that set up by the court. And the money that the company have to pay actually is 100 million of US dollar, and some extent into billion US dollar. Next, please. Next, please. This is also a good slide to show you that some people get a benefit from the fire when law is not enforced in the ground. then illegal land transaction happening both inside the concession, outside the concession. So our study at Rio found that forest if law is not there, then people sell the forest actually, and the price of a hectare forest is quite cheap in Indonesia. If this is illegal, of course it is sold illegally. It's the price between $30 into $100 per hectare. And then if some people cut and slash the forest and ready for plantation, the price increase into $665 per hectare. It's done by what we call organized crime. And that land is not ready yet for oil palm, for instance, because it's quite expensive to prepare for the oil palm. Then some people use fire to burn the land, and you see the price of burn land increased about $250 per hectare. And in the slide, you can see who gets what actually from burning land. So what I would like to tell you, burning land is provide a benefit to some people and managed by what we call organized crime. Burn land is a price 856. And then this burn land actually is ready for agriculture plantation. If then you, for instance, grow up the oil palm in this fertile soil after burning the land, and after 3 years, your oil palm can be worth as much as $3,000 or $4,000 per hectare. That's the way actually transforming from forest into agriculture plantation and see money generated through this activity. And I would like to again to reinforce you, fire is also economic activity. So a lot of people get benefit from fire. And according to our study, if we sum up for the whole Indonesia in 2015, the money generated by fire is amounted $8 billion US dollars. Next, please. If you look at the slide, it is the number of hotspots for the last 15 years, and also the politics, local politics, Pilkada, because according to our study, fire also about local politics. So we try to understand the relationship between fire and also when local election happen in every district in the whole Sumatra and Kalimantan. And we found that there is a significant relationship between hotspot and local election, or what we call in Indonesia Pilkada. Fire seems to happen.
Harry, just a second. Just a second. Harry, just a second. This is Peter. There is somebody who joined in via telephone and interfering with the audio. Came in as guest 13. So if anybody is joining in via telephone, could you please mute your audio? Otherwise, we will have to drop you from the conference. You're interfering with audio.
Sorry.
Okay, Harry, go. Harry, go ahead. Harry disappeared.
Can you do it?
No, I wasn't talking to you, Harry. Please go ahead. The person has muted.
Okay,
go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, this about fire and local election. So a year before Pilkada, before the local election, fire was high. So it is similar with the connection between deforestation and local politics. There is a 5-year deforestation pattern in Kalimantan, in Borneo, part of Indonesia, due to local election. So again, I would like to say that fire is not because people are not aware of the dangers of fire, but because there is a economic motivation, because fire provide money, and also because of politics, land politics, land for food. Some bad candidate for the local leadership try to use land uh, to get their food for leadership in at the district level.
Harry, you have 2
Okay.
minutes left.
Okay, next please. This is my last slide. So what Indonesian has been doing since 2015. First is that what I involved a lot, develop a grand design for fire prevention in 2016, 17, 2019. To make sure that fire is not happen in the intensity like 2015. And the grand design was there are 5 things to do. First is incentivizing not to burn. The second one is improving local election. The third one is law enforcement. The fourth one is infrastructure development, particularly on water management. The last one is how to attack fire at the early stage level. And the cost for this grand design is 3 billion US dollar for 3 years. The third one is establishment of the Peatland Restoration Agency and issued the government regulation on the peat that seems quite conservative, and also deployed the police and army to monitor fires. And as we discussed a lot, the agrarian reform, social forestry, and also land use planning in more participatory way. Also, we involve in to make a stronger local regulation, local government to involve more actively. Also, greener ISPO, Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil. We want to our oil palm can be globally accepted. Follow up the FLEGT, the timber agreement between Indonesia and European Union. Law enforcement to corporation, mid-sized company, and farmer as being strengthened. And also we look at the private sectors and local community to take more responsibility to prevent fire. I looked at some companies initiated fire-free villages. Also, because of greater pressure coming from the NGO and CSO, then the local government as well as private sector take more anticipative way in reducing fire. And the last one also, there is a greater awareness that fire is not because of they don't know, but fires are connected to social, economy, as well as political issue. And because of these things to do, and as a result, fire in 2017 is decreasing below business as usual. If we actually we made a projection based of time series to project what happened in 2017, the hotspot, and we check in the global forest watch data that fire in 2017, I perceive that even less than the business as usual. Okay, that's all what I can share to the audience, Peter, and Thank you for listening and for facilitating my presentation.
You're very
Thanks,
welcome,
Peter.
Harry. You're very welcome joining us from the CIFAR headquarters in Bogor, Indonesia. Harry, I'll mute you from here as we promised. Just a second. I mute your video. Excellent. Our next speaker is Steve Ellis. Steve, if you can already unmute your audio and your video so I can see you're online and ready. Steve Ellis moved to Indonesia about 5 years ago and joined the reality check approach. Thanks, Steve. I see you. RCA Plus core team in 2015 um, is where he joined in an effort to better understand and share communities' perspectives about their lives. Since joining RCA Plus, Steve has participated in over 10 RCA studies, including leading the RCA study in Uganda earlier this year on farming and local market access, an insight study in 2016 on international refugees in Indonesia, and the RCA study in Indonesia on hygiene and nutrition. Steve co-led the RCA study on people's perspectives of air pollution from peatland and forest fires conducted for UNICEF in late 2016. Steve, it's all yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Peter. And hopefully my audio is coming in okay
Yeah,
here.
you're all set.
Okay, thanks. I also have to apologize. I'm a bit under the weather, but I'll do my best here. So thanks again, and thanks for everyone that's joining. So I'm going to talk about sort of a sample of some of the findings from the reality check approach study that the Palladium RCA Plus team did on community perspectives done last year and conducted for UNICEF. So next slide, please. Thanks. First, really quick, just what exactly is the reality check approach? So it is a qualitative research method where we stay in communities for multiple days and nights and live with families and focus on having informal conversations with the families that we stay with, but also with lots of people in these communities. Um, and also really trying to experience things along with people, along with observing and having conversations. And then we also work in small teams in larger communities to enhance the triangulation that we can do. Next slide. Thanks. Really quick on the scope as well. So the fieldwork was in September of last year, so about a year after the heavy haze period in 2015. We went to 8 communities in 5 provinces across Kalimantan and Sumatra and stayed in 31 households. So those are the families that we lived with. And in total, the study included about 1,400 total study participants. And you can see on the last point there, while the majority of the families that we lived with were primarily farmers, there were some families that we stayed with who did not have farmland, and so whose primary livelihoods were, for example, fishing, wage labor, or perhaps small shop owners. Next slide, please. Thanks. Um, Going to first talk about regulations and enforcement, and I'll come back to the first point again in the next slide, but it's important for this one as well, and that's that farmers in the communities that we stayed in do not see their slash and burn practices as causing bigger fires. And this is one of the reasons why the enforcement of burning regulations, which people say has really increased the last couple of years, why it doesn't really make sense to people, and why they also say they kind of feel unfairly targeted a bit by this. And in a lot of ways, people describe the enforcement as kind of intimidation. And so, for example, in one of the communities, people said that actually quite recently, police had been going around to households and asking people to sign no burning pledges. In a few of the communities, people talking about military and or police going around on patrols with weapons. Um, and this kind of intimidation also applying to local officials as well. So, for example, in one of the locations, people told us that the district head had been told that if there were any fires in his district, that he would lose his job. And subsequently, he put pressure on the local officials below him um, to also make sure that there weren't any fires. Otherwise, they would also lose their jobs. And one of the issues with about all of this as well is that people don't really understand the regulations either. And so you can see on the right here, this is a banner from one of the locations. Um, saying that it's forbidden to burn forest or land, and it mentions two regulations there. And there were banners or posters similar to this in all of the locations that we visited. But one of the issues is that farmers don't know or don't understand the regulations, but also in some cases officials sharing that they don't really know either. So in a couple of locations, local government people talking about this. In another location, it was a police officer saying that they don't really know what exactly the regulations may or may not allow for. And one thing that was also happening in many of the locations is people saying, because of concerns about what might happen if they burn, that while they were generally still burning land, it was on much smaller scale. Some people saying that they were burning their fields at night because of worries about the consequences of this. And actually, in one location, people saying that they hadn't been burning or preparing their land at all for planting because they were worried about potential consequences. But this meant, of course, that they weren't able to do any planting yet for that season. Next slide, please. Thanks. So as I mentioned, slash and burn, and it was being done in 6 of the 8 communities that we visited. It's the traditional method that people say they've been using for generations. It's cheap, it's effective, and people also emphasized that they're confident that they can do it safely. However, people did actually talk a lot about in different locations that they are open to change, and they are open and in some cases really looking for alternatives, different ways to farm. And this included even in, for example, one location that has really strong cultural ties to its farming methods. And this is because they realize that slash and burn may not be sustainable for a number of reasons. Uh, so they talked also about they do shifting cultivation in this particular location, and they talked about that every year now they often have to go further and further to find new land, and so it's getting more difficult for them to do this. Um, and also, they realize that with the fires, with regulations, with enforcement, that they do need alternatives. One of the issues, though, is that in a lot of the different locations, people were saying that they don't necessarily have a lot of confidence in how the government might respond to this or potentially has already tried to respond. So, for example, in a few of the locations, we heard about this program called Cetak Sawah, which is like literally printing paddy fields. And this is a program that's sort of designed to sort of give people access to a large patch of or patches of cleared land that they can then plant rice on so that they don't need to burn areas of their own land to plant rice. Um, But in one of the locations, for instance, people told us that they were told that they were going to get this program, but then told that it was going to be providing them with wet paddy seeds. So um, rice that needs to be on in irrigated paddy. And the issue with that is that in their area, um, there isn't any irrigated land, so they didn't see how that was going to work. In another one of the locations, people said that the contractor that had been selected to clear the land for this program had not actually fully cleared it, had not done it properly, and so actually nothing was able to be planted anyway. So people are really hoping that the government will kind of come into communities as well to try to really see what the challenges and the opportunities are to make sure that programs are relevant. And they are really looking for people to be at the community level and to work with them and to show them about different ways that might work. Next slide, please. Thanks. Um, Now turning to health and education, one of the things that we noticed when we started to talk to people and our families about what school closures were like during the heavy haze in 2015 um, is uh, that it was pretty clear that, first of all, the closures were quite sporadic, so quite off and on. Another thing, though, was that in single locations, um, the closures weren't necessarily consistent either. So, for example, you often had a primary school that might have been off for a particular week. But in the same location, the high school may have only been off for a day or two. And this was happening in almost all of our locations. Um, Many people were also saying that the schools were supposed to wait on closure decisions. They're supposed to wait from on officials from the district level. And some of the issues with this also were that, first of all, the weather could be quite different in district towns, which might be a few hours away. Um, but also, what was happening in some cases is that kids were going to school, walking to school in the morning, only to find out that actually school was going to be closed and then being sent home, and potentially were walking back and forth in what might have been a period of heavy haze. And the other thing about this was that many of the families that we stayed in are living in wooden homes, which are often well ventilated, but thus not very good for heavy haze. And so it may actually make more sense in some cases for kids to be in school, or at least to be in these um, sort of concrete buildings. Um, the other issue when schools are closed and when kids are on holiday or sent home is that both children and parents were sharing a lot that, sort of regardless of the weather, really, in the haze situation, that eventually kids will play outside anyway. And parents saying, first of all, it's tough to keep kids inside all day, but also they're quite busy. And in a few of the locations, parents saying as well that often what would end up happening is they would actually take their children to the fields with them, again, regardless of the weather potentially, because they weren't able to supervise them otherwise. Next slide. Thanks. One of the interesting things when we first went into these communities is that it was actually pretty difficult to talk about haze at first. It took some time to get into this issue. And what people were saying is that, this is something that we've been experiencing for 10 or maybe 15 plus years, almost every year, varying degrees. But it's something that, while it is a nuisance, it's something that people have learned to deal with and that they do deal with. And actually, in a lot of our locations, people were saying things, and these were mostly these were quite rural areas that we were staying in. And they would often say things like, "Oh, well, the haze is probably worse in the city area." So often not feeling like their area had it actually that bad, despite the fact that many of these communities had pretty severe haze in 2015. And this might be one of the reasons why, when we started talking about health issues with people, with our families especially, that the parents said overall in almost all of our families that they and their children were actually quite healthy during the 2015 haze period. However, when we did talk with children directly, they did actually talk more about some health issues that they did feel. And so, for example, you can see on the right here, this is a body map that a child in Riau did. And the boy here is putting yellow dots on areas of his body that he said felt sick when there was heavy haze in the community. So a bit of difference potentially between parents and children there. Um, Also, although people know that and parents know that the haze is bad, people were not really talking about concerns or worries about the long-term consequences of this exposure. And overall, people saying that actually they get sort of the majority of their information about haze and from fires from the television. And for instance, not a lot of talk about information being shared at schools. And in a couple of the situations where people were mentioning this, children said that they didn't remember what had been said. In another community, two midwives had been brought into the school to talk about haze, but this was actually after the heavy haze had ended, after the rainy season had already started. And we had in another community where a teacher said that he really wanted to be able to share helpful info about haze to his students, but that he didn't feel informed enough to do so. So seemed to also maybe be some opportunities there. Next slide, please. So that's just a quick sample. Thanks very much, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Steve. Excellent. We will come back. We have a number of questions already coming in for the different presenters. So please keep the questions coming in via the chat box. We will aggregate them and then pitch them to the presenters, to the speakers at the end of the series of presentations. Stephen, you can mute audio and video. I would ask Lodi. Thanks again, Steve. I would ask Lodi and Diaz, who are coming up next, to unmute so I can see you coming online. Let me just bring up the next slide. So this is our first duet of speakers. I would like to introduce to you Lodi Andrian and Diaz Tika Rawadiate from Pulse Lab in Jakarta. Lodi Andrian is a design researcher at Pulse Lab Jakarta. He uses a variety of investigative methods to gather insights about human behavior that contribute to problem-solving process, simplifies the massive complexity of our world using visual information design. Diaz is passionate about civic innovation and especially interested in the thinkers, the doers, and the fixers that create positive change across Indonesia. As Deputy Head of Office for Pulse Lab Jakarta, she connects ethnographers, social activists, technologists to the lab's big data research projects to add local context and encourage the diffusion of the technologies they embody. With over 14 years of experience in international development assistance, she has delivered projects in education, policy-relevant research, and civil society support. Diaz, I think you're the first one up, if I remember well. Please
Yes,
go ahead.
that's right.
All right, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Firstly, maybe I'd like to explain a bit about Pulse Lab Jakarta. We're part of the United Nations Global Pulse, and we're set up to experiment with new data sources, especially with digital footprints. But a big part of our mission is also to help decision makers make sense of data. We developed Haze, a real-time analysis and visualization tool for enhanced crisis management. And this tool was developed off the back of some of our earlier feasibility studies in 2014 and 2015 to better understand haze dynamics with social media data. So the results of the feasibility studies demonstrated several things. Among these was that there was substantial correlation between the dynamics of hotspots and those of haze-related tweets in certain locations. We know that Indonesia's national disaster management authorities already have ample satellite imagery information, so we decided to focus this platform on augmenting geospatial information on haze by providing automated analysis and visualization that would help make sense of citizen voices. Next slide, please. In addition to the baseline information such as population data and hotspot distribution, this current version of Haze draws from social media data, more specifically from Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. What you're seeing on your screen right now is a snapshot of Rio in March 2014. So the red dots there are hotspots, and the small squares are geotagged pictures that people have posted on social media. And if you see below, you can see that there are pull-up windows that provide insights from the analysis of various data sources. Next slide, please. So here you have the first pull-up window, and the gray areas are actually the number of hotspots. The various lines there show different trends. There are people talking about haze in general. This is from Twitter data. There are numerous haze-related hashtags. There are tweets that mention health effects, and there are tweets that mention other health impacts, such as school closures, airport closures, and the like. We also have other containers, we call it, that look more specifically on each of the impacts. For instance, the health-related effects and the socioeconomic impacts. Next slide, please. So what you can see here, for instance, with health, the number one trend on Twitter in that particular month was the word masks. And it relates to a few things that the RCA found in their study, and also pusing, dizziness, coughing, upper respiratory tract infection. So these are the things that people mention together with the words haze or asap kabut in Indonesian. On the other side, you have several impacts that people have mentioned in relation to the word haze. So when they tweet haze or asap kabut, they also tweet about schools being closed or school holidays. They tweet about visibility. They tweet about campuses being closed. They tweet about airports being closed. And so these are more of the socioeconomic impacts. Next slide, please. We also can pull up image-based insights from Instagram. And what we wanted to see here was actually the the eyes on the ground. So what does the condition look like on the ground? You can see here that there is a peak on certain dates, and you can click on each of the pictures to see what people have posted. From these images, you can see the opacity of some of these pictures, which provides an indication of the lack of visibility because of haze in a certain area. Next slide, please. So we realize that these insights cannot stand alone. Indeed, these insights often bring up more questions, mostly on why these things are trending. So we've really enjoyed very much working with UNICEF, the RCA, and other partners in combining insights gleaned from data mining and analysis with those obtained from other studies, especially those containing actual insights on community dynamics in haze-affected areas. So I'll hand over to my colleague Lodi right now, who will explain this process.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Lodi, design researcher from Pulsar Jakarta. The next 10 minutes will be through the process of how we translate the research findings and insights into actions. So we have the ethnographic study and that you heard before from RCA, and we have the previous research on big data, and that's a lot of information, right? But from the design perspective, that's might producing a lot of opportunity areas that we can do to tackle the problem. And because the more we understand the problem, the better the outcome will be. And so we try to create is intervention concept, which can be services or products using human-centered design as a guiding process. Why we using the human-centered design? Because current government initiatives sometimes and social movement has been tried yet failed precisely because it does not take into account the needs of the users. So in order to do that, next slide, please. We conducted a collaborative design workshop, or we call it a co-design. We recognize the complexity of the issue. That's why we brought together different stakeholders to provide us a different perspective on what could be done to address the haze crisis. So in the co-design workshop, we inviting thinkers and doers from all walks of life. We jointly host a co-design workshop in Jakarta along with UNICEF and RCA. This is a 2-day sessions inviting participants from various sectors, from diverse backgrounds to participate in the process of empathy building, ideation, and prototyping. And ultimately, our goal was not only to undergo a rapid sense-making process, but also to bring about unlikely agents, those you don't typically regard as being directly involved or affected by the haze, to provide us a different perspective on how to tackle the complex issue. So how's the process and what is the co-design looks like? Next design and next slide, please. So yeah, here's the process on design thinking, which we also use in co-design workshops. But in the co-design, it will happen during 2 days. Well, first, we let people immerse with data and stories that we have gathered through our research, or we call it a remote empathy, because the participants cannot actually study more and research to the actual research to the field. So we did like a remote empathy, and here the data and stories play an important role in enabling participants to gain knowledge of the subjects matter. So they have the same level of understanding with the researchers. That's the goal. In this case, we also hired the professional actors to representing the people in the haze area, so participants can interact with them, talking directly to them. And secondly, is a synthesis. The participants will trying to define the problem that they are trying to tackle. This is like a problem formulation sessions where it's not just about picking one problem, but to form patterns and connecting various findings to generate a more specific and compelling problem statement. This is important because we want to make sure that our problem formulation accommodates users' needs, habits, and pain points. So after that, we we will do 98s. When they are finished to formulate the problem statement, they can move to the ideation stage, where they will brainstorm together to crafting the solutions that can tackle the problem. And the stage is where different skill sets can be valuable, as it enables wide range of creative solutions to emerge. And then after that, ecosystem mapping. Here we need to consider the unintended consequences and enabling factors of the solutions to make the idea implementable in the long run. But in every co-designers, we always encourage participants to bring the idea to life. That's why it means that uh, we need to transform the abstract idea into tangible stuff. This is where the prototyping stage, we created like a low fidelity prototype. The rougher the prototype, the more design team can learn through its creation. And also because the rough prototype are less costly, and iterative range of prototype can be made. And we testing the prototype as a last stage, and to go out and show their prototype to people as a way to get feedback from the users, so they can use the feedback as a way to improve their solutions. That's the typical co-design looks like, and it happens like in during 2 days, with more than 30 participants. Next slide, please. So yeah, here's the result. We have three results. One of them is a Haze emergency kit that UNICEF and Copernic will exploring further this prototype. So this kit, I will explain the Haze emergency kit first. This kit we built to include prototype products that can be applied to protect residents within their home and outside their homes. The solution proposed is comprised of a fan and filtration system, material for sealing a room, and a mask. So all for the course and for the extreme haze season. Copernic and UNICEF will exploring this kit further, and they are in charge to test and building this kit. The second is a school emergency plan. Uh, it's like an alternative education to improve the overall educational experience for students in haze-affected areas. At the core of the system is an emergency school, the temporary classroom located in public spaces that are places in areas near students' homes. To support the emergency schools, a few enabling prototypes were also designed. For instance, like the student volunteering process, and I will explain it for later. And the last one is the community driven air quality monitoring. As there is yet a proper haze relief solution for citizens, we find it more valuable to target AQI information distribution to organizations, to community groups, and institutions. And this way, they will be able to work together to collectively design interventions mechanisms to protect people from the impact of the haze. Uh, because because in the current situation, the AQI information is only centralized in urban area, for instance, only in like Pekanbaru, Pontianak, or or Riau. So next slide, please. But we are not just stopped there. Uh, this is the big picture of how we developing the concept of the prototype. We start from collecting data and informations in the research phase. We develop the prototype with co-design approach, the process that I explained briefly in previous slides. Then we bring back the results to the field to the test the prototype, as feedback from user perspective was really important to influence the new shape of the next prototype. And for our second round of prototype testing, we aim to refine our current prototypes by hosting a co-creation with those most affected by the haze from urban and rural areas in Kalimantan. What we are going to do is what we did is to brainstorm and improve on the existing prototype together with our partners, UNICEF and Ranuelum and Muhammadiyah Disaster Center, and others. We focus on interventions in schools and at homes, and invited respondents most relevant to our cause, which is the teachers and adolescents, and resulting in the emergence of a few key ideas to complement the products and service we design. So next slide, please. So here's the example of the of the ecosystem of the idea that I talked. In our second co-designs, we designing the ecosystem of the solutions, not just the solution itself. So for instance, in here we have the school emergency plan, an integrated system for alternative educations. Uh, we designing not only for those single idea, but we also consider it to how we design the location, uh, how we designing the school, how we locating the school, and how's the standard operation procedures for controlling the school closures, and what's the activity in the alternative schools, and how's the teacher mechanism and volunteering, etc. That's why we back to the field, and we designing with the citizens, with teachers and adolescents to thinking about this. Why we did this? Again, because the current government initiative and social movements have been tried yet failed precisely because it does not take into account to the needs of the users. And this often results in the emergency of a few yet significant unintended consequences. It shows with involving the citizens. It shows how a user experience as well as citizen generated feedback can provide inspirations for effective service design and implementations. Yeah, we value cultural nuance, and that's why we involve in citizens in every design process. Thanks. That's all for me. If you have any question, please drop it in the chat.
Okay, very good, Lodi. And you have quite a series of questions already coming in for you and Diaz. Thank you both. We're moving off to the next presenter. Lodi, you can mute for the moment. I would ask
Yep.
the next presenters, Nanis and Jean-Pierre, to unmute. The next duet of presenters is Nanis Sakti Ningrum, who is a senior analyst engineer in Copernic Solutions Lab, a dedicated team focused on rapid experimentation of simple solutions with the potential to improve the lives of people in the last mile. She recently led the first phase of an experimentation project testing the effectiveness of Haze emergency kits in reducing people's health risks during Haze crises. Together with other UNICEF partners, she conducted a series of tests in, and I hope I say this right, Palancaraya. Did I say this right, Nanis?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
All right. Collecting data as a part of ongoing prototyping work. She has an environmental engineering degree from NTU Singapore and also a joint master's degree in hydroinformatics from universities in France, Germany, and the UK. Prior to working with Copernic, um, um, Nanis worked as an engineer with a Singaporean consultancy firm and also was also a research assistant at the NTU University. Her partner today in the presentation will be Jean-Pierre Wack, who is joining us from London. Jean-Pierre is an environmental consultant working in the fields of building design, air quality, and forest fire management. He is currently working on the product development of a Haze emergency kit as a UNICEF consultant. The kit targets families who want to safeguard their health during the forest fire and haze season in Indonesia. Nadis, you're all online. I see your video, I hear your audio. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Peter. So in this session, we will try to answer a couple of key questions, such as what are people common practice to cope with the haze situation, how effective are these practices, and what are other alternative solutions that is existing out there. And also, we are going to touch a little bit on our work in prototype testing that was conducted in Palangkaraya a few months ago. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think you all probably aware by now of how big was the scale of 2015 haze crisis. Looking at the air quality trend in Palangkaraya at that time, the haze period started from August and lasted about 3 months. And during this time, we calculated that 45% of the time, the air quality index exceeded a dangerous pollution level. And this happens mostly in October. I should probably mention also that this reading is based on PM10 parameter, which is a particulate matter with the size of 10 micron or less. And the real situation was likely more complex than what the data has shown here, because there are other poor parameters that constitute pollution's index level. So how did people cope with this situation? Firstly, there were a massive group effort from the NGOs, the civil societies, and government, mainly in distributing the mask, providing oxygen houses, and giving a medical treatment to the haze-related illness. There were also a number of initiatives in haze-free school and haze shelter, as what Runwellum and Big Red Button has been doing over the past year. However, we also interested in knowing other measure in the level of households, especially to protect family members from inhaling toxic haze. So we interviewed people and listed down all the so-called haze hack action, which includes stuffing a wet dacron in the house opening, putting a wet t-shirt over a fan, bubbling the air over a bucket of water. And for those who can afford, they bought an air purifier unit. And we were asking this information partly out of curiosity, but also we were thinking that we really need to start addressing the gap between what people believe will work and what actually works. So next slide, please. So in order to find out how effective of this measure, we tested those several of those in the lab, and the result was not that bad for a desperate measure or the so-called better than nothing type of solution. For example, dacron, which is commonly used as a pillow fillings, removes only 25% particulate within an hour. And the air bubbling does less than 30%, depending on the power of the blower machine. But the most effective material to remove particulate matter is HEPA filter, or high efficiency particulate absorber. So what is HEPA filter? HEPA filter is a type of mechanical air filter that is commonly used in air purifier unit, and it works by forcing air through a fine mesh which trap harmful particles. And based on the test, the filter is proven to remove 99% of PM2.5, which is even lower than PM10. On the other hand, it's interesting to look at the co-design result from PulseLab Jakarta, for example, that suggested children spending 43% of their time at home. So we also trying to look into the housing condition at our project site to give an idea of how we can design a proper hardware intervention. So we found there are two types of housing in Palangkaraya. The first is a concrete house, which is commonly found in city area, and the second one is a wooden house, which exists more on the rural setting. And the most challenging part from the wooden house was that we identified many openings in the house, from the open ceiling rooftop, the gap in the wall slat, and the gap between floorboards. We were quite amazed to find out from survey that only 8 of 20 houses in the village has the floor fully covered with floor mat. So the other 12 who couldn't afford to do so, we can assume that they are breathing indoor air that is as dangerous as outdoor, because basically the haze will fulfill the house at no time. So next slide. So what is our solution? As Lodi has briefly mentioned in his previous presentation, the Haze Emergency Kit proposed a set of solutions for reducing exposure to toxic haze, focusing more on the household unit. The kit is comprising of a low-cost air purifier, which consists of a piece of HEPA filter attached to standard fan, and later we call it as a fan filter unit or FFU. And the second component is a supplies toolkit to adapt to the ventilation in the building. In addition, masks are provided to cover people outdoor activities. And we set a design criteria for the kit. Firstly, it has to be easily adapted and scaled. Second, it is not too intrusive and complementary to household habit. And the last criteria is we aim it to be a low-cost solution to accommodate lower-income people. And the working principle of this kit is quite simple. So when the haze occurs, we try to stop the toxic haze entering the room by sealing visible opening or gaps in the houses with the supplies such as plastic sheet. And when the room is then the fan filter unit will remove the toxic particulate matter and keep the safe level inside the room. Next slide, please. So we tested the Haze kit prototype first in the lab setting environment and subsequently in the Palangkaraya for both type of houses. The test procedure is probably imagine from looking at the picture, start with the haze simulation in a closed room by burning organic materials. It then produced smoke until it reached extreme level condition. And we tested the condition without the intervention and with intervention while monitoring the PM 2.5 level with the particle counters. I will not talk too much detail about the technical result, but those who is interested to learn more, you can revert to our experimentation project report provided as a background reading. And before I end up my presentation, I'll move on quickly to design evaluation. So based on the test result kit against the design criteria we set earlier, and overall, we are pretty happy with the kit performance for the Baton house. This is supported by two findings. The first is the ceiling measure is able to slow down the air leakage rate by 3 times. And the FFU is able to deliver clean air at the rate of 20 meter cube per hour. The costs, however, were still a little bit higher than our target $50. And we are currently trying to engage Indonesian-based filter manufacturer to reduce the cost of shipping and taxes. However, we also came across a negative result since we found that this prototype is not suitable for the wood house. First reason is because the gaps in the wooden house was just too many. So the cost to seal up was quite high. And secondly, by sealing almost the entire side of the room, the temperature inside become uncomfortable for the family to stay inside for a long time. So I will hand over to my colleague GP for wrapping up our session. Go ahead, GP.
Good afternoon all. Next slide, please. So the process we've gone through here is to develop a minimum viable product for a household to be able to safeguard their health during haze conditions. Another objective is to make sure that the product is scalable, i.e. there is the right ecosystem of people, of organizations who can supply the fans, supply the filters, such that if there is another El Nino fire season, there is enough availability of equipment to be able to scale the solutions. The next part of the design process will be to look at different buildings. So we have been doing field research on schools and classrooms to see how the solution developed for homes can be adapted for larger volume space with higher occupancy. Schools are also a good location because we know that children will spend a certain amount of time in the classroom in a day, approximately 30 to 35% of their time. So for the way we have tweaked the process is we look at how do we improve the performance of the fans, of the filters to cover a larger volume of area? How do we need to adapt the testing methodology What are the health standards for schools, particularly from the Ministry of Health? And also, what would be the performance specifications so that any organization could take these solutions on in addition? Just as a sort of glimpse as to some of the challenges in this space, the real trickiness is you are effectively converting how a classroom operates in terms of the flow of air, humidity, and heat. So if you imagine a classroom of 20 to 40 children and you're looking to seal up the room, you have to introduce new fresh air and also manage the heat buildup as well. Actually, that's the real tricky design improvement that we're working on now, is how to make the classrooms comfortable while still also having clean air as well. So in terms of, if you would like further information on the work we're doing with schools, we'll be sending out some testing results and also looking to implement classrooms with haze-free measures related to the volcanic ash preparedness in Bali as well. That's it all from my side, Peter. Over to you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Jean-Pierre and Nanis. Much appreciated. Jean-Pierre, you can go on mute, and Nanis also. We have more questions rolling in, which is good, so keep them coming. Over to our next duet of presenters. We have Lina Caroline joining us and Walid Tam. Lina Caroline coordinates a Ranu Wellum Foundation campaign, Youth Act, a youth movement to end forest fire and haze in Kalimantan. Working together with communities, schools, and universities, Youth Act conducts a health education. Lost my screen here. Youth Act conducts health education about haze, forest fires, and peatland issues using media to raise awareness. Lina also writes in Dano magazine and films as part of the Youth Act campaign. Her partner today in the presentation is Wali Tam. Wali runs a social enterprise called Big Red Button in Singapore, producing content for organizational change. Starting in TV and moving to social media, Wali has used stories to evoke change in communities in the areas of race, inequality, and policymaking. Wali went to Kalimantan in 2015 to distribute masks and haze monitoring technology. Since then, he has designed and built haze shelters to provide clean air for vulnerable groups in Kalimantan. Lina, I know you had some connectivity problems yesterday. I hope you're online. If you can please unmute, and Wally, you can also unmute to jump in.
Okay. Hi everyone.
Oh,
nice to be here with you. Yeah.
I can hear you, Lina. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would like to start from Ran Willem first. Actually, we haven't known about forest fire or haze when we start our community, because this community actually indigenous filmmaking community where we talk about our culture and also local wisdom in Kalimantan, especially indigenous Dayak people, and we speak about the issues, especially about land grabbing and discrimination that most indigenous people face, especially in Kalimantan. So in 2015, on the next slide, in 2015, when forest fire and haze happened, it was very bad. At the first, me myself, in my experience, I don't really aware of it, and as I often share in some opportunities, my experience, Indonesia, we have 2 seasons, but in Kalimantan we have 3 seasons, and one of the season is haze season. So at first for me, forest fire and haze is not a big problem. But in 2015, as we can see on the slide, it was thick yellow haze, and our city, especially in Palangkaraya, it's like dead city, and then fire everywhere. And our founder, Emanuela Sinta, she initiated that we have to do something about this. Even we do not have any idea actually about this anyway. And we start with what we were doing at the time, cooking and feeding the firefighter. And then after that, when we have donations, at the time is surgery mask, and we distribute it to people in Palangkaraya and also to the villages in central Kalimantan in some districts. And then when the situation in Kalimantan reaching Singapore, and many people out of Kalimantan knows what happened in Kalimantan, especially when it started from a documentary film. The title is The Heart of the Haze, and it's reached Singapore, and then our Singaporean friends come, and there we met Wally Tam and his team, and then he came to distribute masks and 19 type masks, and also giving information and his education, especially about PM 2.5. And start from this, we realized that this is important information that we cannot stop in us only. So we have to do something about this. And there we start raising awareness by share about this information, especially the dangers of the haze, especially PM 2.5, and also the importance of using proper masks. Because at the time, even the governor and the Minister of Health said that the proper mask, especially in such kind of haze, is a surgery mask. But in fact, it's not true anyway. And yeah, maybe Wally can share about this better. And so we realized that raising awareness is very important. But when we went to the field and we saw and we heard the stories from the ground, from people, especially in the villages. They do not have access for health protection. They do not have access for medicine or information how to protect themselves during forest fire and haze. And we realized that the solution is not only distributing masks. It's not only to conduct health services for those people, but we realized we need to provide a safe place for people, and that's Haze shelter started. And I think Wally will explain about this Haze shelter better. And well, that's how we start this work, and until today it's going, especially in raising awareness and provide health protection for people, especially in Kalimantan. Well, that's all from me. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Wally. If you could go to the next slide. Basically, I was there in 2015 and I met Lena and team. And after we distributed the masks and saw the suffering that people were going through, the question that remained in my mind was, if you could go to the next slide, what are we going to do in terms of a long-term solution when a haze season goes for 2 to 3 months? So if you see in my first point, even if you have a mask, you cannot wear it for more than 8 hours. And that's a concern. Pregnant ladies, children should not be wearing masks for more than 8 hours because it leads to oxygen deprivation, and it may affect the fetuses, and of course it will affect children. And there's also the issue of if you can't wear a mask for more than 8 hours, how are you going to seal up your home? Well, sealing a home requires certain parameters that we were very focused on, which were that we want to see air change happen within your sealed environment. Imagine putting your head in a plastic bag, right? If it were totally sealed, you would get very warm. There would be CO2 buildup, and then you suffocate over time. So sealing is not enough. There needs to be air change and air exchange. So we worked on addressing those issues, but while we worked on addressing those issues, we were very concerned about making measurements about it. Those two pictures over there are distorted, but what they show is air quality meter and airflow meter. So if you're going to be doing work in this space, you will need to bring a means to measure, without which you won't know whether your solution is actually working, and also whether it is working effectively over time. Because just because you see particles being removed from the air, it doesn't mean that you're getting the rate of air change that you need to keep people oxygenated and breathing properly. Yeah. So if you could go to the next slide. This is the design we created for the Haze shelter. It's been 2 years in the making, and this year we have completed it. Basically, what we did was there is a first stage filter. What that is an anti-static, is a static electrostatic box that picks up all your big particles. Because when air enters into your space, if you only use a fine filter, that filter will choke due to all the ash and all the particles in the air. So our design incorporated a pre-filtration so that we can have our fine filters in number 3 live longer and serve the user for more than a month. So that was our first design. We built it and we, in a sense, completed it this year in around July. And we're quite proud of it. It can hold about 40 adults or 60 children. Then we were asked, how do you take care of those who are in the villages? And can you seal a village house? At first I thought, no, not possible, because there are too many leaks, and to seal it all up still begs the question of how do you create air change? So a week after, I was still thinking about it, and this idea came. You can see on the right, a little cage, a little nest, we call it. It's made of bamboo, and it is sealed with shower curtains. So we're quite proud of this design because the bamboo is free, and village folk know how to put structures like this together. And the shower curtains, because they're waterproof, they also keep out particulates in the air, right? And what we do is we take the same fan filter, put it on top, and create an overpressure environment. We're quite proud to say that we can generate about almost 20 air changes an hour, way beyond the WHO recommendations. And while we're still refining the shell, the plastic shell, we're quite confident this is something that will that we can develop for the villages in the future. Yeah. So for us, I think much like our friends before, thinking about the problem, talking to folks who live in the problem, and finding ways to solve it such that it's feasible. That's been something of our focus. This in a sense has been our distraction from work for the last 2 years. We care very much about Ranu Wellum and our friends there, and we've been racing against the clock before the next Haze comes to provide a safe space. And we hope to scale our work because this has been all funded by ourselves, and we hope to see more people participate and build more of such shelters. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Wally and Lina. Wally, if you can go on mute now, we'll have questions coming in for you. I would like to switch to, let me follow here in the script. Last and not least, Richard, if you can unmute. You're coming up next. Richard Wecker manages UNICEF Indonesia's social policy portfolio on emergency response, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and mitigation. As part of its country program with the government of Indonesia for the period of 2016 to 2020, UNICEF aims to address major environmental haze issues through focused research and innovation on the impacts of toxic air pollution haze from peatland and forest fires on children's health and well-being. Richard has guided formative epidemiological and ethnographic and policy studies on the topic. On this basis, he is directing product design for low-cost haze exposure risk reduction interventions. That's quite a mouthful, Richard. Richard also advocates for the inclusion of air quality in humanitarian standards and in terms of the post-2015 development goals. Richard, I can hear and see you. The floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Peter. As Peter mentioned, I work for UNICEF Indonesia. I'd hoped to have a duet session today with my colleague from UN Environment. Unfortunately, he was called away. So I'm going to handle this one solo. This chapter of the webinar focuses on advocacy on standards and SDGs. We'll be addressing two key questions in this presentation. How can standards and improved data serve to benchmark and forecast the impacts of fires and air pollution events? And secondly, how can data on air quality and health serve to shape a broader discussion on the Sustainable Development Agenda? So could you flick to the next slide, please? So I just want to talk a little bit about the SDGs. Forest fires affect air quality, the climate, and the environment quite broadly, undermining progress towards achieving almost all of the SDGs. Take your pick, and you can probably make some assessment as to how the fires are limiting the potential of achieving those goals. But in the context of this discussion, the following four depicted are particularly relevant to children's survival and lifelong opportunities. Firstly, good health and well-being, SDG 3, specifically 3.9, which states by 2030 substantial reduction in the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals and air, water, and soil pollution and contamination. So on this point, as Harry mentioned in the opening, over 500,000 people presented with acute respiratory illness during the 2015 fires. Those were administrative figures quoted. If any of you are familiar with the concept of the burden of disease, this is only really the tip of the iceberg. Modeled studies have estimated that premature deaths from air pollution events range in the excess of 10,000 people in Indonesia. So that's not people that are just suddenly dropping dead. That's premature death. So you can picture that in terms of a number of years lost from your potential life. And the impacts of air pollution on children's cognitive development is still something of an emerging area, emerging field in research at the moment, which is being highlighted and is still unknown. So moving to SDG 4, quality education, specifically 4.1, by 2030, ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes, outcome opportunities for all. Now, as we heard from the RCA, the closure of schools and other public services during the Haze and fire episodes in Indonesia undermines learning opportunities of local children. The 2015 Haze caused the closure of 4,778 schools, affecting more than 2.5 million students. So you can picture or you can imagine that if you have been exposed to air pollution events such as the 2015 fires over the course of your life, where you're missing or school is disrupted for up to 3 months per year, you can imagine how that will it has the potential to really affect your learning opportunities and lifelong employment opportunities as well. SDG 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. There's a couple here, 11.4, 11.5, 11.6, 11A and B. Fires are linked to the transboundary air pollution or haze phenomenon, linked to climate change impacts and public health deterioration in major Asian cities. So, yes, although we've heard a little bit about some of the issues with haze risk reduction in rural areas, it's important to understand that the haze doesn't discriminate in the sense. Major urban areas are equally exposed as our rural areas, and where people are in densely populated areas, there's cause for concern. The current guidance on safe spaces for protection of children from haze has not been rigorously tested nor implemented to national air quality standards, and I'll come to that in a little bit. So SDG 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So specifically 13.1, 13.2, 3. The greenhouse gas emissions from Indonesia's peatland fires were enormous and of global significance. That's why it received so much airtime. It was described as one of the worst environmental disasters of our time. And during the 2015 haze crisis, greenhouse gas emissions contributed to an estimated 40 to 45% of Indonesia's total emissions for that year, of 1.75 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So that's just to give you the overview. The government of Indonesia is championing children's efforts to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, starting with the inclusion of several SDG targets for children in its medium-term development plan, the RPJMN, which extends from 2015 to 2019. And there's been a recent presidential decree on the operationalization of the SDGs at the local level as well. Concurrently, the Ministry of Planning, Bappenas, is preparing its green growth path or low carbon development plan, for which extends from 2020 to 2024, which will demand high regulation of these emissions sectors. So why am I mentioning all of these points? Well, as I mentioned in the questions earlier, what is the importance of standards and goals in terms of guiding how we can lead ourselves on the development agenda? Now, could we potentially just move to the next slide, please? So, what is depicted here is an excerpt from a recent policy analysis policy study that was conducted by UNICEF Indonesia with ITB University and Wahana Busy, which is the national chapter for World Vision. This study was conducted as a multi-stakeholder research exercise that engaged with various government stakeholders at the national and the national level, and in the cities of Palangkaraya, Palembang, and Pontianak, so in Kalimantan and South Sumatra. So what you're looking at is basically a timeline from 1997. So in the past 20 years, you can see those red marks. We call them air pollution events, which have spiraled out of control and with increased intensity for prolonged dry seasons. The timeline also illustrates a number of fire and air pollution policy instruments that have been promulgated over time. The focus of this study was really to evaluate policy gaps between an ideal world and reality, using qualitative data on the utility of policy instruments in terms of avoidance of negative impacts to humans of fire and haze, but also in terms of also in relation to prevention of fires as well. So actually the top line, above the line, it mostly relates to environmental management and fire policy, and below, actually a little bit mixed up, but below far left, you can see specifically in that red box shows law number 22 in 1999. Below that is the Minister of Environment degree on air pollution and the Air Pollution Standards Index. So at that point, when the government of Indonesia was effectively mandated to start more actively monitoring air quality information, and moving along, down the bottom you will see some other policies that relate to that 97 decree, which determines how that information is shared between line ministries. And it's quite critical, relating back to point of the SDG 3, where we're talking about substantially reducing the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals and air, water, soil pollution, contamination, because the indicator for that SDG is specifically relates to the level of PM 2.5 or PM 10 in a given urban area. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, just one more point on that one. Can you go back? Concurrent to this study with ITB, C4 was also conducting research on policy gaps, and Harry mentioned some of that research earlier, and there was some offshoot research that was looking into policy gaps in relation to existing facts on the drivers and distribution of fires. That research led by Rachel Parmenta, who was unable to present today, unfortunately, but nothing in that study was specifically looking at how the targeting addresses different vulnerabilities in groups to the negative impacts of fire, but it did reveal some very interesting points in terms of the drivers and distribution of fire, so we can share with you that research separately. But indeed, what is needed is a better understanding of how these policies are actively engaged in the preparedness and response to fire and haze events. So there's potential further research there that we're exploring. Next slide, please. So this next slide is really looking at trade-offs and impact standards. So where previous presentations have focused on exposure risk reduction measures, the prevention of wildfires is commonly agreed as by far the most effective way to protect the environment, avoid economic damages, and and negative impacts, the negative health and social impacts of fires. So actually, what you have here is it's a rather busy slide. Sorry for that, but visuals are fine, but the points above and below on the left-hand side are basically the pros and cons, the trade-offs. So the Lancet, which is international journal that epidemiological journal, released its planetary health series just recently, and the illustration is an excerpt which highlights the positive and negative trade-off dimension. And I'll just quote a little piece from that study because I think it's quite relevant to this. That a growing body of evidence is showing that deforestation, a major component of land coverage change worldwide, might increase the prevalence of several sources of global morbidity, meaning negative health outcomes as a result of air pollution events. The policymakers should consider these public health implications when assessing trade-offs in land use planning. The role and cost effectiveness of conservation in supporting human health remains uncertain. However, studies of the role of conservation in public health suggest that managing protected areas can help to achieve health and sustainable development targets, which relates back to the point that we understand. So on the right, what you're actually looking at is another excerpt from another study, and that relates to the social and environmental impact of forest management certification in Indonesia. This was the first statistically rigorous evaluation of the environmental and socioeconomic impacts of the it's the Forest Stewardship Council. So this was in this FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, was in response to unsustainable timber production in tropical forest concessions, that were introduced to improve environmental, social, and economic performance over existing management practices. So what was the case was that despite the proliferation of forest certification over the past few decades, there were few studies that were actually looking at the effectiveness of those management arrangements. What you can see there in the far left is the percentage of air pollution. Zoom in my slide here. The percentage of air pollution incidents at the top right in green, and the number of malnourished people in the bottom right. So what you're looking at is both environmental and social impacts of these standards in terms of their impact in terms of reducing the impact of fire incidents. So some of the studies actually, this study was revealing that respiratory infections were reduced by 32%, and it also had an impact in terms of malnutrition. So I think the reason why I wanted to show you this was mainly because it's taking that data that's looking at air quality and relating it back to health, but really grounding that in standards, global standards, national standards, and evaluating the impact over time. Yeah, if you could please move on to the next slide.
Okay, Richard, we have 3 minutes.
Okay, sorry, I'm really quicker than this. Okay, so finally, what I'm showing in this second last slide is a map of Indonesia with a number of the fixed monitoring stations around the country that are measuring PM10. There's a phase-in plan for measuring PM 2.5, the introduction of new fixed monitoring stations. And what you have at the bottom left are the air quality standards, indoor air quality standards for homes, for schools, and health centers. So what we have at the moment and what is available, as we mentioned earlier, is that the current challenges that air quality data is not generally available and comprehensible to the majority of people. Mostly it's institutional data. It's shared between institutions. It is available online, but not all of it. Not all of it is available for research. We've had challenges in accessing some of this data over time. So it's really what I just want to highlight by this slide is the importance of linking air quality with health standards. Next slide, please. Oh, so the last slide is really where to from here. I just wanted to make a couple bullet points on a few bullet points on where to from here and a couple upcoming events. There's introducing some of the air pollution risk reduction measures that were developed by various partners in this collaboration. It's an important part of the next steps. Raising awareness of the link between fires and health is also a big part of the work that we're looking at moving forward in terms of collating and making use of existing studies, global studies, and relating them to the Indonesian context, as well as developing further studies in country with local partners in collaboration with international partners. It's important to enhance and link air quality and health data monitoring and triangulation in relation to national and global standards. Where there's paucity of data from fixed monitoring stations or of health administration, health registers nationally, how can we complement that data by say, relating local with data that's say remote data from satellites and the sort of thing that we're seeing from modeling studies that have been conducted internationally. Lastly, what was highlighted just briefly previously was how we can potentially forecast future scenarios of land use, which a lot has been done in the way of mapping. C4 has done some incredible mapping with its deforestation atlas, the Borneo Atlas, looking at that land use and highlighting the trade-offs of making decisions to grant further concessions and the cost of inaction with regards to these public health interventions and the cost of maybe not benchmarking some of the monitoring that's going on in relation to standards over time. So just to mention, there's a few conferences there that are coming up. I think this one in December is all purely focused on air pollution with the UN environment. Keeping tabs on that, and next year there'll be a global conference with the World Health Organization. So it'll be really interesting if you're interested in the research and some of these narratives. Hopefully they will flow into these events, as well as the GLF that's happening in Bonn. Thanks for your time. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Richard. If you go on mute for a moment, because I have questions coming in from you, but I would first want to pitch it over to our first presenter. Harry, I have unmuted you from here. I have a couple of questions for you. Harry, are you online?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
Okay, Harry, I have one question. Well, I have two questions from Sep, actually. The first question is, he said, the slide on graph 3 of your presentation shows fire frequency. Now, does that column for wood plantations include also acacia plantation or also timber plantations? Are these fires exclusively on peat or also in the mineral soil? Go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, Peter, it is actually all included here because we on our research we monitor actually the area of the concession because it occurred either in the plantation acacia, also outside the the main plantation, because in Indonesia we have 11 million hectare of plantation, wood plantation. Only 3 hectare actually planted with the main plants, including main trees, including acacia. So for this question actually is not only acacia plantation, but all plantation in the concession, including illegal or oil palm inside the timber plantation. And it is also not exclusively for peat, but for all. There's some plantation actually consists of peatland, also mineral soil. So what I put it on the slide actually as well as mineral soil.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Harry. There was a follow-up question from Seb saying, what is the current state of using technological solutions for fire detection other than hotspot data? And some of your colleague presenters have already mentioned data collection using social media, using Twitter, or using Instagram. But what could you give us other states of technological solutions for detection of fire other than hotspot data?
So
go ahead, Harry.
Yes, actually, the government still use hotspot data for the first detection, and then after that they use radio, the mobile phone to check on the ground what happened to the hotspot on the ground, and then inform back to the local authority, and if there's really fire, then they will deploy some. We call it a Mangala Agni or community close to the area. So it's a combination between hotspot base and also on the ground check. Also different kind of technology, including mobile phone. Once you have a real fire, then they can take the picture, then upload it to the website that the managed by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. So it's a combination of the technology. But as I mentioned, hotspot still the main technology that is used in at least first early detection of fire.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good, Harry. I'll mute you on audio and video again. Because I know we can't mute it locally. Steve, I have a next one. May I make a reminder to the rest of the presenters, if I'm pitching any question to one particular presenter, if you have something to add, just unmute your audio and I will give you the floor. There was a question, Stephen, if you could unmute from Alan. It was meant to you, but also could be answered by some of your colleagues. In the projects you worked in, and I think this is referring to your projects in Indonesia, are there any alternatives besides rice planting for local farmers? Can they plant fruits and vegetables? Are there any other job opportunities outside of farming? And I think this is trying to focus people away from slash and burn solutions to something which would not require slash and burn. Go ahead, Stephen.
Sure. Yeah. So, good question. I think one of the things is this is a little bit. It's going to be rather context specific, but sort of generally, I think in actually, so mentioning here, Ellen's mentioning fruits and vegetables, and actually related to that. Chetak Sawa, the Printing Paddy Fields program that I talked about, one of the communities was actually hoping and wondering if they would actually be able to plant pineapple instead of rice in the area that was being planned for that, because again they had this irrigation problem if it was going to be wet paddy seeds. But the issue was that they didn't actually know who to go to ask this, if there was if it would be allowed. sort of what so basically they didn't really have a person to interact with about this, and weren't really consulted really in general about the program at all either. So this was kind of pitched to them as this was going to happen, and they had questions about it, including that, hey, it would actually probably be good to be able to plant something like pineapple here, but didn't yet know how to go about asking that, or if there might be possibilities like that. um, in a lot of areas, what people um, were doing, if they weren't involved in palm oil, or um, as maybe in addition to planting rice, is rubber, which has been a bit of a struggle because of the decreasing prices. Um, and one thing that was, I think, you just mentioned in one or two locations, though, that some people have been looking at getting into as an alternative to rubber, at least, is pepper, which I think some people were quite hopeful about that, getting better prices for them. Um, One of the issues with rice in general is that it's kind of, especially, yeah, definitely in Kalimantan and Sumatra, it is the staple food for most communities, and so they really want and expect to be able to provide rice for their families. Though, if they're not able to plant rice themselves, then of course they need to be able to buy it, which for a lot of the families we stayed with would be quite difficult. There are rice for the poor programs, for instance, that Indonesia does, but those programs also have various issues as well. Um, as far as job opportunities, this is a difficult one. I think partly for us, and specifically with the work that we did in this study, part of it was, again, these were mostly rural communities. Um, so not much in the way of job opportunities besides potentially waged labor, which would most likely be in a palm oil plantation. Um, for some of the areas that were a little bit closer to big cities, there are some possibilities there. So usually in things like construction work, or kind of small service industries, becoming drivers, things like that. But in general, these aren't yet big urban centers, and the job opportunities are overall, might say, relatively or even quite limited. And perhaps, I mean, this could get into a bit of a bigger discussion also, in the fact that this gets a little into the fact that Indonesia's economy is still quite concentrated on a few urban centers, and so even some of these big cities and areas, like Riau, for example, or Central Kalimantan. There may not actually be a lot of differentiated economic activity going on, despite the fact that these are already quite big cities. Yeah, I think that's I think that's good for
Okay,
that question.
very good, Steve. Thanks. Next, I have 3 questions for Lodi and Diaz, and you guys can take the microphone um, um, and see who is best positioned to answer these. Lodi and Diaz, first question is, I think it was on something what Diaz mentioned, is how do you technically collect the data through social media? We understand it is Twitter, it is hashtag based. Instagram is also hashtag based. But do you have any specific tools that you use to collect the data? How practically do you do that? And I see Diaz and Lodi are online. Go ahead.
So we develop our own tools, and we use data mining techniques to get the raw data, both from Twitter and from Instagram, and we aggregate it, and we use a degree of anonymity to then look at just the keywords of topics for interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, it would be interesting maybe to elaborate a little bit in the follow-up questions that we will answer via email on, your data mining techniques. If there's specific KPIs that you would
Yep.
implement or you would recommend people to use. But I have another one. Which already partially answered in the chat channel I saw from Seb. He said, well, one general question, of course, for the Haze Gazer is it location biased in the data due to the usage of social media and connectivity in the rural areas versus urban areas, or in certain geographic areas versus others? So you already answered yes, of course it's somewhere by design geographically biased, but you said that's why we felt the need to implement it with insights from other information sources. So here the follow-up question would be, what would be the other information sources to give a more general overview of the data collection, less dependent on use of technology or available connectivity, Diaz?
I think it doesn't have to be dependent on quantitative data collection or on data mining per se. If you look at one of my slides, I think it's slide number 2 or 3, I think slide number 2, you'll see there that that where there is thickness of pictures posted on social media, that's very much concentrated in Pekanbaru, so Rio's capital, whereas the Haze hotspots are actually on the peripheries. And when Stephen and the RCA team and Lodi, who came along for that study, explored in further depth, it was revealed that a lot of people didn't even have access to internet or other communication technology. And so therein lies the inherent bias of digital footprints. But does it mean that if you don't have a digital footprint, then you don't have a voice? And I think this is why analytics, such as the things that we do at PulseLab Jakarta, needs to be complemented very much by the things that RCA does, in that it captures immersively the experience of people in areas that are not captured with big data analytics.
Okay, very good. Lodi, sorry, I had to mute you because I was getting echo as you guys are sitting in the same room. I don't know for which one this would be. Again, it's on the Haze Gazer, and it's slightly related with the previous question on how do you anticipate a possible bias on connectivity and geography. But I think it's might be interesting for people to see if the same technology could be used for other applications. And in there, one of the questions would be is how do you ensure that the data collection is gender neutral? Or not gender biased. Thinking in some cultures where mobile phones might be mostly used by one gender or the other, either Lodi or Diaz. But Lodi, I had muted you before. Go ahead.
So Lodi is flicking his pen at me, and he's muted himself.
All right, go ahead, Diaz.
Yeah. So I think the way we mine data is we take the raw population. So with Twitter data, for example, what we do is set parameters. We want all tweets in this particular location across this particular time period, and we just get the raw data. The level of aggregation that we do means that we have to eliminate a lot of the data that would indicate whether this is male or female, and therefore you can't get gender data. And that's why it's a bit difficult to look at those kinds of aspects. I think this is a very good tool for a landscape analysis of what's out there, but it is also a very blunt tool in that you can't have that kind of finesse of knowing which segments of the population you are capturing, or even which ones you're leaving out.
Okay. Okay, very good. Thanks, Diaz. I think it's really interesting on if there's possibilities to broaden this beyond, let's say, the haze and the fire monitoring in Indonesia. But I'll come to that question a little bit later. I do have one. If you could mute for a moment, and Lodi, I'm bringing you back on the foreground. You elaborately explained on the design process. So our politicians, policymakers, and local officials involved in the design process you described. You need to unmute your audio, Lodi.
Okay.
Yeah, I have you.
Okay. Yeah, we involved the local officials in testing the prototype in Palangkaraya. We're gathering feedback from them as well. We test prototypes with them, so they are part in the design process, but they are not involved in our first co-design because the main goal is to translating the prototype, translating the insights to, and prototype development. So we rather invite experts like JP, the researcher like Steve, communication experts, environment specialists, etc., etc. Because in this stage, in the first stage, we want to widen the possibility on design, and we still do need perspective on the local officials, but in the different stage, which is in the testing the prototype, and and after then the second co-design. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Lodi. If you can go on mute. Slightly related to this, I have a question coming up for Jean-Pierre and Nanis. So if you guys could unmute audio and or video. Jean-Pierre and Nanis, and leave it up to you if you want to answer individually or together. Through the discussions and the testing with the local communities, what was the response from local governments and the civil society to your test results?
So Nanis, if I can take that one. So on the civil society side, we met with the Humanitarian Forum Indonesia, who is a collection forum of various NGOs, including Muhammadiyah Disaster Management Center, Dompet Duafa, and various other faith-based organizations and non-faith-based, such as Habitat for Humanity. And they're very positive about the opportunities for low-cost solutions. A lot of the organizations had tried various sort of solutions that Nanix explained in the presentation, but actually we found that they were limited in terms of the disaster response that they could give. So on that side, there's a certain need for cost-effective solutions, and we will be working with them over the course of the next 6 months. Maybe on the community side, Nanis, you want to expand on that
Jean-Pierre
side?
or Nanis, I have somebody touching, one of the two of you touching the microphone. Makes background noise, sorry.
That might be me.
It was you. I told you, stay away with your hands from those buttons. Go ahead, Jean-Pierre.
Shall I start again, or was it?
No, it was fine. It's fine, as long as you keep your hands off it.
Not judging.
All right. Then, Nanis, your take on that in discussion and the relations with local communities, might be local government, civil society, but also the people that you work with.
Right. In terms of the government, local government, we only have a few chance of round discussion to share our results. And I think they basically appreciate any alternative solution that is proven effective in protecting people's respiratory health during the hay season, because basically they are still searching what is the best solution so far. And I think, if I'm not remember, there were also a discussion in the possibility to align the how to say the possibility to not adopt, but like aligning the timeline of the overall discussion with the time when the government trying to plan their budgeting. So I guess we can take it as a positive sign in that sense. But in terms of sharing the other test result, for example, the meets, like the whole practices with the the common practices that societies or the local communities doing in fighting the haze or in reducing the exposure of the particulate matter. I think it's still a big homework for us also to try to communicate our test result, so that it's not only in numbers that we communicate, but it's a really something meaningful that to convince them that actually yeah uh, um, how to say trying to convince them to take on the better solution rather than just something that doesn't work.
I agree. And just to add to that, I think the availability of data and the testing that we've done is really important to validate the solutions. And for schools, we'll be working with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education and Culture on how to develop the testing methodology and implement solutions which have data that backs them up, rather than what you could call local knowledge or other sort of solutions that lack substantiated evidence.
Okay, very good. Thank you both. If you can go on mute. Both of you, I have the next set of two questions for Lina and Wally. So if you guys could unmute for a moment. And we're staying with local communities because probably the adoption is one of the main challenges that we have. So for either Lina or Wally, how have the prototypes, and I think they're referring here to the prototypes of the haze shelters, how have these prototypes been perceived within the local community? Is the adoption enthusiastic? Does it need more convincing? Or are they looking at it, what are these guys coming to do over here with these bamboo shelters? Either Lina or Wally, go ahead.
Maybe Wally.
Well, Lina is based in Kalimantan. When I was there, when we completed the shelter, we had visitors from government agencies coming, and we actually spent about half an hour to an hour sitting in the nest, the dome shelter that's to be built in village houses. Very comfortable, no heat issues, and we were having a conversation for a long time. So as far as like a widespread like implementation in houses, we haven't done that yet. But in terms of testing that it can reduce particulate matter in the air and it's comfortable to use, we've done it on a small scale within our testing facility in our shelter. Yeah, I don't know if Lina has seen more people try to use, visitors come and try out the shelter, the nest upstairs.
Actually, we have some guests that come to our headquarters, and we try to explain what we are doing, especially about his shelter. And then, yeah, we also do the same as what Wally did when he's here, and yeah, we explain about it, and then we also tell the people in Palangkaraya, especially to the schools and also young people, if you want to learn about haze shelter and how to build a safe house for, safe space for you and your family, and just come to our haze shelter. And
Yeah. So one thing I can draw on in terms of the past, in 2015 when we came with N95 masks, people adopted them very quickly because the proof was in the breathing. So our strategy is to build one headquarters like we have already. That's where Lina is right now, and prove to people that when you walk through the door, the air is different. The air is clean and you can breathe. And only when they're calm can we then start educating them about how do you wear your mask properly? How do you build this nest for your home back in your village? Without which, you're going to meet people who are in duress, who are breathing difficultly, and they won't be listening really. So the strategy is to build a HQ, a headquarters like where Lina is, stock it with supplies for our distributed shelters, And then when we empty out the HQ of our supplies, that space is now ready to receive people to hide from the shelter. So we estimate we can distribute about 100 domes per HQ that we have. So that's maybe 100 families and 40 adults in total per HQ with nest distribution. Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
it's right, Lina.
I need to clarify one thing about the nest. It's not from bamboo anyway. It's from rotan.
Okay,
Yeah.
this precise, it's from rattan. Wally, take note, it's not bamboo, it's rattan, which is a completely different thing.
Well, the intent is we can build with both materials, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe that brings us to the next question. In some of the solutions can be localized, and if we think of it in a larger scale, that there's millions of people affected by haze in the season, only even in Indonesia. Now, in your opinion, what would be your wish or your plan to implement this on a larger scale, both in terms of financing it, because I assume this comes with a certain cost, how to manage the distribution, the implementation, train people, both for the setup as well as of the maintenance of these structures. Either Lina or Wally, go ahead.
Okay. Well, as a designer, I guess I'll take that real quick. Our designs are under the Creative Commons license, and they are free for anyone to use. Whether they use rattan, bamboo, wood to build their structures, essentially what we're doing is we're creating a tent with an overpressure fan filter to push clean air through it. So we believe that this is really an issue of finding the fan filter that is most effective to do this job. And currently, Nanas and JP are exploring those low-cost alternatives. For us, we have a favorite brand simply because I've been dealing with the haze in Singapore for 3 to 4 years. I found a sweet spot in terms of what my dollar buys so that I feel assured about its performance. But we're very open to finding new alternatives. How do we finance this in Indonesia? Well, so far it's been talking to partners who understand the complexity. As a Singaporean, I have no clue on how to access funds from the Indonesian government, but I do do Facebook campaigns, and I do talk to people who care about the environment, and we've been raising some money. Our interest is to just find more funds to build more headquarters and therefore distribute more domes for villages.
Okay, very good. Thank you both. Thank you, Lina.
Could
Yes,
I
go
just
ahead.
add on the implementation and the funding side?
Yeah, sure.
I think there's Wally's done great work on his side of promoting shelters and getting the ideas and Palangkaraya circulating, and it's helped to get interest both at the province level with in Kalimantan Central, as well as with NGO partners and private sectors. So the idea is the sort of collaboration around the prototype solutions will then pitch to private sector associations such as the Fire Free Alliance, to the NGOs such as Muhammadiyah Disaster Management Center, so that they can take on these open source designs and using local suppliers to then go on as well. So really the idea is to get a sort of local capacity both on the financing and implementation side.
Okay, very good. Thanks, JP. And probably Richard, they're going to start knocking on your door also for a wider implementation in Indonesia. But when we talk about haze and fire and smoke and air pollution, ways to monitor it, the solutions, the link with policymakers, the actual implementation of the solutions. From what you've experienced in Indonesia, according to you, what can be and what should be transplanted into other parts of the world? Do you see a potential in that? What would be How could we go about it? Is there a forum where these kinds of experiences can be shared and adapted so that the lessons learned from Indonesia can be taken to another, let's say, problem area? Richard, go ahead.
Thanks, Peter. A good question. We UNICEF Indonesia has been entering this. UNICEF Global actually has been entering this space on air pollution and environmental health in general over the course of the last 5 years, and it's a foray into this organization's mandate in terms of broader climate change programming, climate change adaptation programming. I think it's really important to emphasize that these are what we've discussed today is quite a mix of how research is fed into small scale solutions, but as was just mentioned, some of the discussions around this, it's having something really tangible that you can see, and having data to substantiate those discussions that can really lead to sort of wider discussions on climate change adaptation. Now, I think the question with regards to how some of these solutions can be transplanted, well, UNICEF country offices in China, Mongolia are facing similar issues when it comes to air pollution, but they're facing different contexts. For China, they're really facing industrial and urban air pollution to some of the highest degrees seen worldwide. India might be another country office that's also a good example. Mongolia as well. They face some major issues with air pollution during the cold months of the year when people are burning organic matter indoors in their yurts to stay warm. And when that organic matter runs out, people are burning rubbish resulting to burning rubbish to manage the issues with the cold. So I certainly believe that some of these risk reduction measures can be transplanted. Actually, we're talking with our country office around the country office in Mongolia is already working with filter fan units, off-the-shelf products, and they are networking with. Am I still on the call? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you're still on the call. Sorry, I stopped the presentation.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Something was just changing it. So they're already working with private companies and partnering private companies with schools, so that the private companies can sponsor a school to fit a filter fan unit within the school. They're fortunate in Mongolia because already their school structures are well insulated because of the cold. So the issues with sealing the rooms is not such an issue over there. So that's just one example of where these actions are already taking place in other country contexts now. So with China country office, we're already talking about potential next steps with these sorts of interventions. But I think going back to your question, what would be the way to go about that? Is there a forum where these sorts of experiences can be shared? Well, I think more broadly, aside from the actual health interventions, there's other types of there's a broader discussion and dialogue on the health, the links between air pollution and health that is happening globally. As I mentioned, there's a lot of research that's going into that in a number of different country contexts, and there are a number of academic forums that are really probing these issues from different angles. Sharing is always a challenge. Finding a common forum to share is a challenge. Well, hopefully the Global Landscapes Forum can serve that purpose for us. It has done so in this webinar, and hopefully we'll receive some feedback actually from that in-country forum that we had in May. There were a number of in-person contacts that evolved from that, and because that was live telecast as well, or it was recorded and delayed, there were a number of people who contacted us afterwards with interest to collaborate. In fact, that was actually how we ended up working with Rana Wellum in the first place. We did hear about their good work on the Haze shelter, and Manuela Shinto came up after the event and said, "Hey, so glad that you're working on this issue. It's so important. Let's talk, collaborate." And that's what led us to the last 6 months of collaboration, which has been really quite a dynamic, quite agile. We've been using our own resources. It has been building on what momentum we already had, but we just sort of met and moved together. So it's promising for those people out there. I think that this sort of forum really does facilitate. And if you have any other ideas about forums and ways that we can share, I'm more than interested to learn about those and to plug in. So thanks.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Richard. And that's the role that the Global Landscapes Forum really plays, is trying to be the either the speaking platform, the writing platform, the platform where people who work on similar projects can put their heads together, or use our platform to reach a wider audience and to transplant solutions from country to country. With this, I would like all of the other presenters to unmute their videos so we can have kind of a group picture to the grand finale. Harry, I already unmuted your video. I would like to thank our 10 people who were online today, facilitators and speakers. Thank you, the audience, for your engagement. Thank you also, Richard and Lindsay, in getting the group together and engaging them in making this digital summit. As promised, I will distribute a link to the recording and the presentation slides to you all, to everybody who was subscribed in the next days. I will also follow up on the questions which you forwarded in the chat channel, which were left unanswered during today's webinar. We're almost right on time to end this within the time limit that we put ourselves in. I hope you can also join us in our next digital summit on measuring impact, which is coordinated between GFAR, COSA, and the Global Landscapes Forum. And actually, this is the day after tomorrow, on October the 26th. The announcement is already on our blog. Also, book already, not announced yet, but preview, book already November the 8th, where we have our third digital summit, also concentrating on the experience from the Peatlands Matters conference in May, which will talk about local communities and peatlands. So I see you soon. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed, and you will get follow-up emails with the recordings and the links to the presentations and answer questions in the next days from me. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all, and wish you good luck. See you in the next one. Okay, see ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Peter.